All right, so today's topic: what's next on DeFi for Stellar, with a focus on the protocol that you guys have been developing, orienting around Stellar turrets. I think maybe a good place to start is just kind of an intro to yourselves, and get a sense for who you all are. We kind of get a little bit of an intro into how you joined Stellar, but hey, now you're building big things on top of Stellar. We're past the intro stage, so maybe kind of give a little background, how you guys met, what you're working on, and then we'll kind of just take it from there.
For sure. I can give a very quick background on myself personally, and then talk about, I guess, Script3 as a whole and where we come from and what we've done. So, personally, my name is Marcus Paulson Luna. I am 2 years out of college. There wasn't a whole lot of work prior to doing crypto stuff. I kind of just graduated and jumped in, but I did have a short stint as a management consultant. But been in crypto, or been heavily interested in crypto since 2018-ish. I've known about it for longer than that, but I didn't actually start trying to build things until 2018. And yeah, that pretty much covers it. Alex, do you want to quick talk about how you are, or who you are?
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Alex. Marcus and I actually met in college, actually all the way back to freshman year, including Barry, who's somewhere in the audience around here. All three of us actually met freshman year. And yeah, my background is as a software developer. So basically came from writing corporate software security stuff and jumped into crypto pretty shortly afterwards.
Fancy.
Super fancy.
And then on Script3, we've had a bit of a, I guess, roundabout journey to get where we are, but I suppose every startup does. So we started the company that became Script3 Ltd. Actually started back in 2018 and was called Adventum Technologies. So we started all the way back in 2018 with this like half-baked, let's bake financial derivatives on Stellar idea. And it actually was possible. It was quite annoying. You could, without like having on-chain programmable smart contracts, you could set up call and put options using just a network of pre-authorized transactions and custody accounts. It was a very, very gross system, but it did work. So we started by trying to do that, and it was like always kind of a half project because we were all in school. So it was like, it's like 1 month we're going to put a lot of work into this, and then we like forget about it for 2 months, then we go back into it. But we did end up going to Meridian in 2019 with it because I like sent an email out of the blue to Corey Higgins, I think. And she responded, and Stellar was kind enough to like pay for my flight and let me come speak, which was awesome because I was a college kid and I had no money, but I wanted to go to this cool thing. I went to Meridian, talked about our options product, and then continued after that. Like we started taking it a little bit more seriously and started talking to more people about it. And then Tyler released a blog post called what was the original article about like Stellar turrets called? It was like Turing signing server is like a model for decentralized, like Turing complete smart contracts on Stellar or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So I remember I was like on vacation in Northern Washington at the time, and I read your article, and I was like, wow, like this solves so many problems that we've been struggling with because we don't have Turing complete smart contracts. Like this makes everything so much easier. We need to start using this. So I hopped in the Keybase and like started asking questions, and we started chatting. And then towards the end of that year, Tyler reached out to us and asked if we'd be interested in building a proof of concept protocol or DeFi protocol using Stellar turrets, and we immediately said yes. So that's how Project Venus started. Us, Tyler, JST Capital, and then Lisa Nestor and Phil Meng from SDF were also involved. I spent around 6 months like brainstorming, or maybe it was less than 6 months. I don't know. It felt like a long time. Brainstorming and figuring out how to build a short-term forward protocol using Stellar turrets, because we decided that was a pretty obvious use case, given that you have a lot of remittance companies that are based in the Stellar ecosystem, and Stellar is really marketed at remittance companies, and remittance companies use short-term forwards because short-term forwards are very useful tools for pegging currencies and not taking on inventory risk when you're transmitting money, right? So we finished Project Venus, got it all audited. Everybody decided it was very, very cool and proved that DeFi on Stellar turrets at least somewhat worked. And then that project kind of hit a back burner for a bit. It still is on the back burner. The code's all still out there. We might build it eventually. I will probably open source it eventually. So even if we don't build it or like add it into Yieldblox, someone else can build it. But I guess separate from Venus, at around the same time, we were entering the Stellar Community Fund with the options product that we mentioned earlier called Option-Blocks. And then we were thinking, at this point we started chatting a lot more with various people about Option-Blocks, and kind of came to the conclusion or realization that this would be an incredibly difficult product to launch in the Stellar ecosystem. There probably wasn't enough volume, there probably wouldn't be enough usage, and we were probably doomed from the start if we launched it before trying to do anything about liquidity and capital in the Stellar ecosystem. So we said, okay, how do you fix liquidity and capital efficiency in a DeFi environment? Well, you probably need a money market from step one so you can actually move capital to wherever it's most efficient. So we decided to build Option-Blocks and added that to our Stellar community fund pitch, and ended up doing quite well in the community fund. Mm-hmm. And now we are, Option-Blocks is probably officially, currently it is in a coma state where we don't know if it will be built in the future, but right now there is no work being done on it. And we are fully focused on Yieldblox, which we have finished developing and just released on the testnet, so anybody can go check it out at yieldblocks.finance and actually use it and see what an actual like DeFi application on Stellar is all about. So kind of a long answer, kind of a long story, but that is how we got here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting one, and not unlike the journey that a lot of other companies have taken, particularly in the SCF, Stellar Community Fund space, where you start off with an idea and you start to test it and talk to people and figure out whether or not it's viable and how it might land. I think one thing that is a bit unique in yours is your success at pivoting. Instead of getting married to a specific product, you have a problem in mind and you're willing to pivot the actual product that you build to both actually solve the problem and to understand that solving problems sometimes takes different product journeys, right? So you have to build product A, and then you may be able to build product B and then product C to finally eventually get to the original problem that you saw. And I think that's one of the big success stories for me of watching Script3 in the background is this iterative journey of pivoting always with a laser focus on a specific problem, and just making sure that whatever product you're working on at the time is kind of where the industry is, where the tooling is, to actually build something that can help kind of lay the bricks to get to that final problem. It's super cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. It's actually a very similar story to the DYDX founders. I mean, they're obviously much further along than we are, but I actually was introduced to one of the co-founders through Phil. Back when like we met Phil and he figured out what we were doing, he said, "Oh, you should go talk to this guy." And DYDX originally started with the vision of building like American style call and put like option contracts on Ethereum. And they had the same realization that we did, where they're like, "Oh, there isn't nearly enough price stability or liquidity in this DeFi ecosystem. We need to try to fix that first." So they started by building a money market and a perp market. So I always find that kind of entertaining.
Interesting. Kind of. I mean, maybe backing up. This is a relatively technical talk, and we'll get into the techniques, the technicalities soon enough. But I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about that concept of the business plan, the problem you're trying to solve, and just speak to kind of this bigger picture. What is it that you're trying to do, and underneath that decision, why have you landed on Stellar, and then ultimately Stellar Turrets, and then I think that'll be a nice lead into just speaking for a little bit about Stellar Turrets itself, and its uniqueness in the entire industry.
So I guess you can think about a problem statement from like two levels of focus. Like on a broad problem statement, we're trying to fix equitable access to complex financial services globally, because there is no equitable access regardless of what people in other DeFi ecosystems tell you. Because most DeFi's like biggest, I guess, goal is to solve that issue. Like financial services are extremely constrained to developed nations because they're all controlled by centralized intermediaries, and it isn't profitable or feasible for a centralized intermediary to expand their product or financial service offering to most developing countries, like, right?
Yep.
So that's like the problem at a very base level. And then to solve that problem, you need something that's like A, cheap, B, very easy to use, and C, I guess, globally accessible and decentralized and trust-free, right? So Stellar solves a lot of those things. Stellar also doesn't have a whole lot of financial services natively because it is non-programmable, right? So you have like a DEX and you have payments, and that's all really cool, but why would I ever go put my money in the Stellar on the Stellar blockchain when there's nothing for it to really do? So that was kind of our understanding of, I guess, Stellar, one of Stellar's shortcomings. I think different people would disagree that it's a shortcoming, but I personally think that in order to have high liquidity and high usage on a blockchain and like effective consumption, you need to have a reason for people to put their money on it. So that's the kind of the problem that we're trying to solve by making a money market. By having a money market on chain, you can. It's really easy for like wallets or other platforms, like something like. What's a good example of like not Albedo? Yeah, even Albedo. What's the Alex? What's the one that I'm thinking of? The wallet in Argentina.
And
I'm completely blanking. Anclap, yeah, something like Anclap. It's really easy for something like Anclap to spin up their wallet, and then now they can plug into Yieldblox, and they can go to all their potential users and say, oh, come deposit your money with us instead of putting it in the bank, because you can hold it in USD, and we can give you 5% because we are integrated with Yieldblox, right? So that's a much more powerful pitch to the end user than come put your money in us, you can hold it in USD, and send it to other people using our app. So that's the kind of the problem that we're trying to solve. It also, money markets also have the effect of moving capital into whoever's pocket it is most effective in. So a trader or a market maker who has a high need for leverage and capital in order to effectively engage in the markets is willing to pay someone who's just having their money on the blockchain 5 to 10% in order to borrow their capital. And trade with it and leverage with it and short different assets with it. So it makes money a lot more useful. And then the second part of that question is why, I guess, Stellar Turrets. The main reason Stellar Turrets have a lot of great properties in that you can access the outer web with them. It's really easy to start developing on them. I mean, there are some challenges that you have that we can talk about in a bit, but from like a base coding syntax perspective, you can just write everything in JavaScript, which is great because I could help code without having to learn Solidity, right? So
sure,
that was very nice. And then you also have access to the whole internet. Instead of having to call some weird on-chain oracle for prices in Yieldblox, we just call FTX, Binance, and Coinbase and build a price aggregate from that, and then cross-reference it with the DEX. So we can do stuff like that. Whereas if we were building on a programmable blockchain, we'd have to rely on some sort of on-chain oracle. But I mean, the primary reason was we didn't really have another option when building Yieldblox. We needed oracles, we needed liquidations. There wasn't really a path for us to build the money market protocol since there was no on-chain smart contracts. So turrets were the closest we could get.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. And I think it's kind of speaking again to that, like Stellar turrets, the limitations or constraints that you have within Stellar, while they're very good because it allows that capital efficiency where there isn't this arbitrary number of operations that you have to support. Like you know exactly what's going to be coming in and how that's going to affect the whole network, which allows the computation to be much lower because your attack surface is just that footprint is so small compared to other chains where you just need a lot more computationally intensive work to be done to ensure the security of the network. And it's just who knows what's coming in. Like it could be a ton of work that we're about to process and that has to get paid for.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I think about turrets. Go ahead.
It's really this difference between the on-chain versus the the off-chain method, where stellar turrets are off-chain, but they finalize on-chain in the sense that they produce an XDR, a valid XDR, which in coordination with the signature structure can actually submit something to the network. And again, that whole idea going back to, I remember way back when the idea started, someone was like, hey, I've got this address, like I need to be able to take in donations from a group of people that are all sending me money, but they don't trust me. And so like, what can I build? What would I do to where I can have people send me money, but they don't have to trust me? And there isn't a good answer for that with just Stellar. You're going to have to trust somebody. Like we have multi-sig, so now there's users involved, and that helps a little bit, but now there's users involved. And, you know, Joe, Terry, and Robin all have to be awake and at their computer or, you know, have Lobster Vault open to swipe right to get the transaction signed. It was just like, this isn't, there should be an answer to this question because it's so basic to the concept of trust minimization and automated trust and the securing of trust. And that's kind of where the idea of stellar turrets came from, is this problem isn't actually hard. All you need to do is just whatever the human was going to do, ensure that the machine can only do that thing. And as a human, if I'm looking at a transaction, there are criteria by which I'm looking at this and making the decision about whether or not I want to sign it. Is the amount right? Is the addresses, are they correct? You know, timestamps or whatever the criteria might be, it's always going to be the same underneath like whatever my conditions are, right? So in the case of a donation address, maybe the conditions are every week this donation pool gets paid out. Okay, so now we've got a timestamp involved. It always needs to be split up between a single address that's, you know, selected at random. Okay, so now there's some random coordination that needs to happen, but like you're starting to see, okay, we're building automation, we're building a contract by which a decision is made. And so now it's like, okay, we don't need humans involved here. We can just have the humans write a smart contract, a function that produces an XDR that will always be exactly what was expected because it's just a program. It's 1 + 1 = 2. And I don't care what computer you ask. If you ask them 1 + 1 equals, like, what does that equal? It's going to be 2. And if it ever isn't, well, within the Stellar world, so long as we're producing XDRs that have multi-sig involved, if it ever equals 3, the XDRs won't match, and so the signature combination won't match, and you won't be able to submit it to the network. So starting with that basic idea, built out that proof of concept, threw out a document, like, hey, this is something that seems interesting. Is there other people that would find this valuable? And the answer is definitely. And so we've kind of kicked off this Stellar Turrets network of these types of computers where people can upload functions and produce XDRs. And my very basic example with my tiny brain of a donation pool, all of a sudden now we've got big brain ideas like what you guys are producing that still work because that basic concept is the same of why should a user have to trust me to sign things when there's a very structured way to make that decision where no human needs to be involved.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I know you wanted to get into stellar turrets here, but just to quickly jump back to your example, with, what was it, the, or I, yeah, like just getting rid of the human involvement, and having a smart contract do it instead. I often use that example when trying to explain why DeFi is going to be so much more efficient than traditional finances. Because if you think about it, like we have a smart contract that handles a deposit in Yieldblox, and it issues you basically a certificate of deposit and puts your money where it should be. And in doing so, it verifies that this deposit is correct, and you have this money, and everything is all good. And it has to be correct about that, along with 9 other turrets. Otherwise, the transaction's not getting signed and submitted. So you can think about that as doing the job of a bank teller, but you don't have to pay someone to sit there 8 hours a day and probably be pretty unhappy about sitting there 8 hours a day. Um, so yeah, if so, you can expand on that elimination of like little intermediaries all over the finance ecosystem and replacing them with smart contracts, and then all of a sudden you have a ecosystem that, instead of employing a ton of people to do jobs that have, I guess, various amounts of value, you have 100 smart contracts doing the same thing and doing it way faster and better.
Yep. No matter how tired a computer is, 1 + 1 = 2. And
Exactly.
the interesting thing is you can replicate that, right? So rather than there being one machine that you hope always gets it right, you have 10, 15, 20 machines, and somebody hacks one goes down, 1 + 1 still equals 2 across the majority, we're good to go. And it's really just answering that question of what is decentralization and what is the security model that we're trying, but that's acceptable, I guess. And that answer varies across contracts. But just having that capability that works, that answers that basic question of, hey, there's automation here, let's use computers instead of people, is just such an obvious win, that Stellar Turrets does really, really well at. So kind of pivoting, or maybe jump boarding off of that, kind of talk through your experience building on Stellar Turrets, because the protocol, like we used to call it TSS, Turing Signing Servers, we've moved away from that terminology to calling it turrets. We've grown up a whole lot from my initial reference implementation to an actual protocol standard that is hardening every day as we continue to commit PRs and write documentation and gather more people around building actual contracts. So just kind of walk through the process of actually building a large protocol on top of Stellar Turrets, some of the pros, some of the cons, and then kind of looking at where you need Stellar Turrets to go next. What are the bits and pieces that are left that people should be getting excited about, getting involved in, to ensure that this off-chain smart contract protocol continues to go the distance?
Yeah, sure. This is one I can take.
Yeah, go for it, Alex.
Yeah, so kind of starting off with the overall sort of experience. I still honestly think back to when we first turned on Project Venus, because, at that point, everything was fairly unproven. So kind of just being able to see it grow from an organic idea into something that's actually functioning, and we've had people try and break and been unsuccessful, has been incredibly exciting. But to kind of drop into a bit more of the technical specifics about, I guess first I'll touch on specifically just the process of doing software development for a smart contract. And then a bit later, I can get into kind of some of the decisions based on where the conversation goes. But one thing that's really nice, and if any of you have had experience writing contracting languages for EVM or for any other smart contract service, you'll know that a lot of what you do is kind of inherently a lot different than what you would expect writing normal code, or just like writing a local script yourself. Specifically, there's things like all these nodes. So let's take EVM, for example. There are thousands of people that are running nodes that are churning through all of your code, basically. And if any of these nodes end up disagreeing, everything kind of lights up in flames. So as a programmer, you have to put a ton of thought into essentially your code being idempotent, which means that it produces the same output given the same inputs every single time. And basically what that means is that if I have to write this code locally and test it, it's a lot harder to do. Whereas with Stellar Turrets, one of the huge benefits is that we're basically just running JavaScript, or we're running a node program locally. So to actually get an example of what your software contract does, all you do is you just run your contract locally. Us at Script3, we've done a ton of testing just having our smart contracts spit out XDRs locally and going into Stellar Laboratory, dissecting the XDRs, making sure things work as expected. And that allows you to really quickly iterate without a ton of bloat behind you, which honestly is probably, in my opinion, one of the largest developmental pluses. I know, Tyler, you mentioned that over the holidays, you took a crack at learning a little bit of, I think it was,
Solidity,
you said
yeah.
Solidity, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it is a lot more difficult even to get like something basic running. And kind of the consequences of that is writing higher level software, things iterate so much slower. And again, in my opinion, that's one of the largest pluses. However, it does bring up a really interesting point that has been a gotcha in some cases as we've been testing. Is the code that you write still has to produce the same output across 10 turrets? Mm-hmm. So for example, if I'm going to go fetch a price, let's say all I care about is Coinbase for now. If I ask Coinbase for a price right now and a Coinbase for a price in even like 1 second, Coinbase is fast enough and churning through enough money that price will actually be different. And one of the amazing things about XDRs is that even if, let's say I'm trying to pay Tyler right now 1 Ethereum worth of XLM. I have no idea what that is. Let's call it like 10,000. So let's say I call Coinbase and the price is 10,000, and then Marcus's turret calls Coinbase, price is 10,001. That XDR will not be the same, and thus the turret signatures will not match, and nothing will submit. So it does bring in a little bit of extra complication that you still have the fact that given all of these turrets, you have to produce the exact same output. And it's just a little bit of other stuff to keep in mind as you're working and writing smart contracts that we've kind of had to hurdle through a bit.
Yeah, for sure. That one's got me on the time bounds on XDRs, where you set a time bound to, this XDR is only valid for 5 seconds or something. But if you call that across 3 different turrets, that timestamp could be different. And now the XDRs don't match. The nice thing is that there's no security concern there. It's just your contract's broken. So fix the contract and redeploy it. But there's no security oops, we accidentally paid someone the wrong amount of money. Nope, your contract's just broken. You're going to need to fix that, re-upload it or reconfigure it with the way that you can configure signatures or the governance that you have, or even things like the heal function within turrets, the ability to move contracts. There's different options for upgrading contracts or transitioning, but hopefully those things would get caught before you ever deployed. But while those things are not that particular issue, you're not going to run into in something like Ethereum, because everything is on-chain and all the data comes from an on-chain contract. There's no external access to variables like that. Any data you pull in is going to come from another contract. It is the problem that all these other chains have to address when creating Oracleized smart contracts. Getting data from the external world into some sort of static state is pretty tricky. And the nice thing with turrets is you get to kind of choose how that works for you. And over time, best practices will evolve. I would assume that some oracles will pop up that address this sort of thing. It's a very exciting time simply because the amount of flexibility is kind of limitless. The ability to do whatever you want and still build a contract that will just fail if something bad happens versus actually produce bad results. It's kind of the opposite in Ethereum. It's easier to actually have people lose money. In this off-chain Stellar Turrets, it's easier to write just a contract that fails versus producing something that would be unacceptable.
And I feel like that's an important point. If you don't mind me kind of piling on, one of the really interesting points that we've sort of realized from writing Stellar Turrets versus attempting to write a different smart contract is, like, let's say you are in Compound attempting to borrow something. As I click that confirm button in my MetaMask, it'll give me a bunch of approximations. Say, you'll probably get this amount of tokens that are going to be used to certify your deposit. I'll take approximately 1 ETH, and it's going to cost you, I don't know, like $150, let's say, to perform this deposit in gas. All of it's kind of an assumption. Because until that smart contract's ran, you don't actually know what the output's going to be. And one of the major benefits, I think, with Stellar Turrets, especially from a user's perspective, which is something that we value greatly, is we can write our contracts such that whoever's running it is actually the sponsor of the
source.
The sponsor of the actual source. Sorry, that's the word for it. Source for the transaction. And what that means is that transaction cannot be submitted until you yourself, with your wallet, up to your wallet signing standards, sign that transaction. So if something bad does happen, you're going to get an XDR that says, hey, I just deposited 1 ETH into this pool, and I got like 1 stroop of these, certified ETH deposit tokens. That seems super wrong. I have my own accord can say, no, I'm going to reject this transaction. I'm not going to let it go through. And, I can go file a bug. So you have that extra layer, which, while it does maybe slow things down and add a little bit of complication, and it's a pretty important barrier that does protect the user, which is something that will be unique to only Stellar Turrets.
Right. Yeah, and I think some of the usability pieces can be solved through interpreters that grab the incoming output from the Stellar Turrets network to say, hey, this is kind of what we're expecting, or the ranges that we're expecting. So like as a front end developer who's building on top of your API, I can say, hey, with these inputs and outputs, this is kind of what I expect to see. And if there's a variant from that, rather than just showing a user a massive list of all the operations that are going to happen, I can filter that down and say, if these things are out of range, or really just pay attention to these few operations, it becomes like there's ways to make that a lot easier for a user to consume, to be able to identify when something may be off. Whereas in an on-chain smart contract, you kind of just push to the contract and hope for the best.
Which is terrifying at times.
That's terrifying. It is. It really is. Like, again, I there have been more and more. I mean, you start talking about the benefits of on versus off-chain, or the usability between two, and think that on-chain provides so much more security. And it's like, it does provide the security or the assurance that the way that the contract is written is absolutely the way it will perform. But that's terrifying. Like, what programmer doesn't write bugs? What contract doesn't have something somewhere that is going to produce a result that's unacceptable, that you as a user have no control over? You have no say in what happens behind the scenes. I mean, you don't even need to interact with the wallet. Your money is held in a smart contract that's controlled completely externally to you, where there are balances and values. Like, boy, I sure hope it's secure, and there aren't things in this smart contract that the engineers weren't aware of. Like, the amount of pressure and obligation that a programmer has to write in that environment, like, computer programs just weren't designed. Computers in general just weren't designed. People weren't designed to write under that kind of perspective. where I think having a model like this where there isn't a lot of interaction directly with the contract versus like the on-chain contract piece of it, that piece is relatively simple so that it's more assured. And then the variables, the pieces that are harder to do, the mathematics of things, are written in such a way that the affected final party has some say, some awareness before actually submitting that. I think that's a really valuable option to have. Not everyone should choose it. It doesn't make sense for every single application, but there are absolutely instances where that makes more sense. And having that option is really important as a sales pitch to users.
Right. And I kind of one more thing I kind of want to pitch into, and maybe this is a bit of a pivot, but kind of like on the choice, for those that are around wanting to start building, smart contracting like applications, everything you look at in the space is going to have some balance of like, how much is this going to cost the user to run? How decentralized is this? How fast is it going to be? For example, the EVM, very expensive, but the peak decentralization you can get, however, it's expensive and it's decentralized, so it's really not going to be the fastest thing in the world. And there's always going to be some balance and certain trade-off. One thing that Stellar Turrets gives you a ton of flexibility in is just how decentralized you want to be. And this is a really important point because I imagine as Stellar Turrets gains more popularity, there are going to be things that pop up that aren't exactly acting in your user the best interest. So be sure, because whoever writes the Stellar Turret contract gets to choose just how many nodes have to run it for that contract to be able to be submittable. And that's a really interesting point because it gives you the ability to sort of dial that decentralization piece how you feel. And obviously, the more people that need to run the turret, the more it's going to cost, the more time it's going to take. However, the more decentralized your product's going to be. So for example, if I were to go to L1 EVM, if I go to some L2 that's been out there like Starkware or Starknet or ZK Sync, they all kind of have set dials with how much decentralization you get, how much is this going to cost you, how fast is it going to be. This is kind of a rare circumstance where you have a little bit of play in that dial. And, Stellar Turrets being off-chain can't ever reach the decentralization aspects that like a layer 1 EVM will. But having a little bit of play in kind of what's the best situation for your products is definitely something we're thinking about as you start to look for platforms to build your next idea or your next product on. And I think it's something that maybe is a little underlooked about the Stellar Turrets ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't think Stellar Turrets is a silver bullet. I don't think the EVM is. I don't think Arbitrum or any other sidechain layer 2 solution is going to be the one that everybody migrates to. There's going to be an ecosystem of these things that serve the various needs of the products, businesses that are building on top of them, and the users that are interested in utilizing or having their problem solved by those services. And there needs to be a wealth of different choices. One thing that's I really like about Stellar Turrets, and you've already talked about this, is just the ease of accessibility for development, and just how easy it is to start building smart contracts. You just write some JavaScript in the Stellar SDK, deploy it, and you can deploy it to one turret and you're centralized. Hey, it's your turret. You're not decentralized at all. You've basically done the same thing you would do if you deployed it on your own server, kind of what all the services do right now on Stellar, where they've got their own SDK or whatever they're using to interact with Horizon on their private server, and that's how you interact with it. But all you have to do is upload it to a second turret and have a 2 of 2 signing configuration, and you've got decentralization. Is it fantastic? Not really. Maybe do 3 where you've got a 2 of 3 configuration. Maybe do 6 and you've got a 3 of 3 or a 3 of 6 configuration, where you now need to run your code on at least 3 turrets, but you've got an option of up to 6, and you can kind of continue to scale it up or down. And the organizations that you choose to trust to run your contract code, you have the ability to select those. You just kind of can turn these knobs to exactly the level of comfort that you have for the product that you're building. Whether it's kind of follows a similar model to serverless in my mind, where it's got this kind of scalability that you can tweak the dials for to the level that your service is running at. And having that type of flexibility is really important for me as a developer who's getting like started in something and doesn't really know yet where I want to land. You can explore the options, but what better place to explore from a cost perspective of just like the time invested to explore something than in JavaScript programming language, where you've kind of got this hybrid model of off-chain computation, but on-chain finality for the actual tracking of balances and orders and offers and all the things that Stellar permits you to have, but doing all of that computation to generate those transactions happening on this pseudo decentralized network. It's a very powerful model just for getting started on things, which is always very appealing to me.
No,
Okay.
I 100% agree.
Super. I don't know if there's any final thoughts. We're going to open it up here. We're kind of over time already, but as people have questions, feel free to request to speak. We'll take some questions, anything specific, either for the Script3 guys. You can also, if you're uncomfortable talking, you can put things in the live chat, and we'll answer a few questions while we wait for some of those to come in. Marcus or Alex, if you guys want to just kind of go through a quick overview of Yieldblox, why you're excited about it. We've got this big testnet launch that's gone live. So much work has gone into this. I would like to hear the pitch for that and kind of this closing. What can people do next? Like if somebody like, oh, Stellar Turrets, this seems so interesting. The resounding feeling that I'm getting from Yieldblox, even from using myself, is I can't believe like this is running on Stellar. So kind of pushing that excitement and driving people to that. Like what should people be doing next? How do they kind of get this taste of what's possible when you're combining Stellar with Stellar Turrets?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. And yeah, for what it's worth, I think the first time that we stood up our version of a beta of Yieldblox back before the private beta that we had last year, I had the exact same reaction, like clicking on a button and stuff happened, and I had just deposited in a lending protocol, and I was like, wow, what's going on?
Yeah.
This shouldn't be possible on Stellar. But yeah, it is, which is very cool. But yeah, I guess we're really, really excited about Yieldblox. We think it's going to do wonderful things for the ecosystem. I already kind of touched on why a bit, but we think that a money market is the only, like, I mean, sure, there are plenty of primitives that Stellar doesn't have, but we think that it's like the only glaring hole in what is capable on-chain in Stellar. You need to have a place to move money to wherever it's most effective. You need to have a place for people to put their assets, for them to be productive and generate interest without them having to actually do anything with them or take on like undue, price exposure. So Yieldblox provides that, and we're very excited about that. We're very excited to see people start to integrate with it. We've already been talking to a couple exchange interfaces, and they want to integrate Yieldblox so their users can leverage trade, because that's one of the properties of a money market. You can buy an asset, deposit it as collateral, borrow stable coins, and buy more of that asset, and now you have a leveraged position. And then we also want to integrate with as many wallets as possible so they can start offering saving solutions and interest rate solutions through, and maybe even borrowing solutions through Yieldblox. So very excited about that. We're also, whenever the actual product is launched, the mainnet version, which we don't really have too much to share there yet, but after that is done, we're really excited to roll out V2. We've got a lot of really, really cool ideas. Obviously, none of it can be implemented by us. It has to pass a governance vote. But we think things like isolated pools would go a really long way in the Stellar ecosystem. An isolated pool would be a lending market that only has certain assets in it. So like Stellar, most of the apps and like platforms on Stellar issue their own stablecoins. Because it's really easy to onboard users if you're issuing your own stablecoin and whatever your local currency is. However, it's really difficult for other people to, I guess, trust those stable coins and actually like want to use them, because oftentimes these are fairly small companies that can't really afford expensive audits and aren't super well known in your local jurisdiction, so you have no real reason to trust them, right? But if you set up an isolated lending pool, now you can have support for whatever that asset is and whatever other assets the other like the issuer is comfortable exposing them to, and it kind of isolates that risk and allows us to support those assets without them being a risk to the rest of the protocol, if that makes sense. And then people will want to use those assets too, because they'll want to borrow them and get it, and it'll like an interest rate will normalize to whatever the market's expected risk for that asset is. So I think that's going to be super cool. And then as for how you can get involved, we are going to probably be open sourcing all of our contracts in the next couple of weeks. So I think that will give people a lot more insight into how everything works and allow them to start coding fun bots like liquidation bots or arbitrage bots that use Yieldblox, and that'll be super exciting to see. And then additionally, I think that once all of our smart contracts are out there, people are going to be able to take pieces of what we use and start building their own apps with it. Like, I mean, you see this instantly on Ethereum. When someone releases a cool smart contract, people just fork it and start iterating. And we're expecting that to happen as soon as we open source. And I am very excited to see what people come up with.
Awesome. Fantastic. We'll make sure and drop a link to the testnet you can play with. I have played with it a bit. It is a load of fun, and just seeing you're running on three turrets right now, right?
Yeah, 3 turrets right now.
The speed is so crazy. Like, it actually is so fast, and you have individual users actually funding those calls, right, with the auth tokens. But it's so
correct.
cheap. Like, you can call and play with Yieldblox all day long, and I don't even think I've spent a lumen yet. It's very different than what you have available in on-chain smart contracts. And again, I think just pointing again to the viability and value of having both models available on and off-chain for computation, where all of the secure stuff and the actual balances, right? Stellar turrets are stateless because we have Stellar as our state. It's just a very interesting model. It allows for some incredible efficiencies while also allowing incredible things like Yieldblox. All right, sweet. Who has questions? Who has questions for these fine gentlemen? We have a request. Let's try and keep it on topic as we throw you in. You don't want a lifetime ban, do you? I will invite, if people want to jump on, raise your hand, and I will add you to the stage. Feel free to jump in and ask any questions that you've got. We'll take probably 5 minutes or so just to work through our questions. Oh, we got Jack Sparrow. You got a Jack Sparrow on the line. You got a question for us, Jack Sparrow?
Yeah, quick question for you. So basically, right now, the way, from my understanding, is I'm new to the whole ecosystem on Stellar. So my understanding is basically that. Sorry, one more time.
Welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. So my understanding is basically that the way to issue a token on the Stellar network is through an anchor, or the way to issue an asset on the Stellar network is through an anchor. Would a Stellar turret make it possible to essentially tokenize an asset from another chain, be it, for example, Ethereum, like an ERC20 token, and then have that issued based on certain smart contract protocol level stuff, issue a token or an asset on the Stellar network?
Yes, I think that trust-free anchor or trust-minimized anchors and bridges are probably one of the best use cases for Stellar turrets, and probably one of the first things that we will see people building. I know that I think Silence is still in the audience, and I know that he's been kind of playing around with that concept. I don't think anything's built yet, but it's something that he's been thinking about.
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
Okay.
So really quick, you can issue assets without any anchor. Anchors tether real world assets to the network. So if you're, you've got grocery buying USD and you need to get that onto the network, an anchor is how you would bridge that asset from the real world into our network. Kind of the what is it, title or the description of what you're describing is actually a bridge, where essentially you're taking an asset that is not in our network and bridging this to some other network, or making this connector to some other network. And Stellar Turrets would be really good for that. I'm actually really interested in this. I do a bit with NFTs, and I would really like for my Stellar NFTs to be able to be bridged to an ERC 721 standard so that they showed up in OpenSea. Depending on the characteristics, the problem is, and this is true of any bridge, the problem is the capabilities. Like, what are the mappings for the capabilities, right? So in an ERC 721 smart contract, there's all kinds of standard functionalities that may or may not be true to have in the Stellar ecosystem. So like maybe your Stellar NFT has some crazy royalty payment type things, or some limits on how often it can be sold. I mean, depending on how crazy your NFT structure is, if it's an auth required asset, when you try and bridge it to another network, those capabilities aren't going to be automatically mirrored, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to take this asset that's on Stellar and I'm either going to lock it in an account, I'm going to burn it, and so that it no longer exists, but in such a way that on the Ethereum side, I can sort of take that. I can grab a hold of it and say, now it exists on Ethereum because it doesn't exist, or it's unusable on this other chain, on Stellar. And so now I'm going to take it and I'm going to trade it and whatever on OpenSea, and then eventually I'll burn it there and move it back into Stellar. So there has to be some sort of functionality on both the Ethereum side and some smart contract and on the Stellar Turret side that say, we agree on how this functionality works, but there won't be, like, unless there's a standard on both sides for like what I would call an ERC 721 Stellar NFT, there wouldn't be this direct mapping. Like if somebody's doing payments on, or like trading your NFT on Ethereum, but there's supposed to be royalty payments made to Stellar accounts, how does that work? It just gets tricky and dicey, because not every token is exactly and only a 721. It also has additional functionalities on it. So the actual asset may be represented through the 721 standard. But if there's additional functionalities, how do those functionalities bridge? Because it's pretty easy to bridge an asset, but if there's additional functionalities, it's like, did we just lose all of that by bridging it? So I kind of all of that to say I'm really interested and really excited on just very, like, let's start at the most basic level, that there are no additional functionalities to consider, and it's just a bare bones vanilla 721 or ERC20 token on both sides, and we need a standard, or we need a methodology that we all kind of agree this is how you either burn it or lock it on Stellar and then access it on Ethereum, and then can move it in that ecosystem, and then vice versa. But essentially, yeah, you've got to have some trust minimized issuer sitting somewhere that says there's nobody in control of this, and at any point in time, if somebody says, hey, I just burned this ERC 721 vanilla token on Ethereum, I would like it to show up in Stellar. Is that possible? I would like to do that it can happen, that there's nobody standing in the way saying, no, you can't. But there's some contract in place that allows for that type of functionality. So it would definitely be a hero's journey to figure out what that standard exactly looks like. But I would love to see it happen. It's more, again, just that, how do you deal with, are we sure, like, there's other bridges involved, right? So is this, okay, it doesn't exist on Ethereum anymore, but have they bridged it over to Polygon? Have they bridged it over to Solana? Have they bridged it over to Algorand? Like, how many times does this token exist? There's just a lot to consider when bridging something. How sure are we that we should allow this? So just kind of thinking through those things. But it would be I think, a ton of fun and a worthwhile endeavor to explore that type of thing, because, yeah, what you get with Stellar Turrets is essentially the ability to have an account controlled by a group of computers, a group of this network. And so long as you can agree on what the contract should look like, in theory, what you're describing could work. Wow, that was a long answer. Thank you for that question, though. Any follow-ups there?
No, I think you definitely covered it. So, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned about the pitfalls of bridging in general. Yeah, I mean, like definitely the protocol is like the feature sets of any asset on one chain. When you're bridging it over, the question is how do you pull that functionality onto the second chain? It's going to be in a frozen state the second it gets locked or burned. And then just in general, like I don't know if you saw, but Vitalik was talking about this recently about like the dangers of bridging and how that can like compromise security when you have multiple versions of the same token on different chains.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely well answered.
Yeah, it's not trivial, and the issue is that how do you standardize it, right? Like I could solve it for one specific singular NFT smart contract, but to say, can we build a generalized 721 standard? I don't think so. To me, it would almost be like, let's think about bridging less about like perfectly mirroring assets and figure out what do you actually want out of bridging. I don't think it is mirroring functionality. I think it's just reducing fees on transfers most of the time, at least when you're speaking like in some of the Stellar terms, like what does that actually, why would you bridge is essentially, I guess, the question I'm trying to answer. Because I think the industry at large doesn't think about that question first. Like, oh, we want bridges. We want to be able to move assets around. Like, why? Why in the world do you want to do that? What are you trying to get out of that functionality? Most of the time, it's reduction of fees, right? That's why we've got all these layer 2s and side chains. Is Ethereum's too expensive, these other chains are less expensive. That's a good reason to bridge, but what you need out of a bridge in that case is less than everything, like all the functionality.
Well, in general, the way I find it, that there's two main reasons. It's one of them is obviously transaction fees, and the second is access to certain assets. So, for example, let's say Yieldblox has something that's specifically on Stellar, and I want to purchase that, and my assets are on Ethereum. A bridge is a great way to gain access to some of those assets, and vice versa. In other words, going from Stellar to one of the things you mentioned was Algorand and stuff like that. I mean, that's like the two benefits I see.
Yeah, yep. And I think those are legitimate benefits that actually really help in the design decisions that would be necessary to successfully build any sort of bridge that would be useful beyond like a singular asset. Which even like depending on the asset, a singular implementation of a bridge could be helpful, right? So you bridge USDC or you bridge YBX out of Stellar, like, okay, yeah, it's a single asset and it's very hyper-specific to YBX, but it still could be really useful just because of the value of that particular token on the network, as opposed to something like an ERC, which you would kind of expect to more be like any ERC 721 or 20. Good questions. Thank you. Excellent. Do we have any further questions? Anyone else want to jump on? Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up. Looks like we got Lumen Jack. I have invited you to the stage. Feel free to jump on. We've also got live chat for anybody who has questions. Looks like all kinds of shenaniganry going on in that channel, so that's great. Lumen Jack, you able to jump on? I think I gave you permission. You may have to enable mics, or who knows how it works on the other end of this. Elliot, you should be able to speak now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello. Loud and clear.
Hey, I posted a question in the live chat, but then all the shenanigans ensued, and I think it got buried. I had a question. Last night I was playing with the public beta on Yieldblox, trying to run some of the turret functions, like through Postman and HTTP requests. Mm-hmm. Are there any of the functions in the Yieldblox protocol that aren't currently working that way, or I was just poking around and just curious mostly.
Yeah, so when you're poking around, you can actually whip up your dev tools on whatever browser you're using, and you should actually be able to track all of the requests we make. But if you look closely, you'll notice that the only things we ever call are Horizon or one of our 3 turrets. So everything that the Yieldblox web app does is doable via program to just those endpoints.
Okay, cool. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things. When I launched one of my smart NFTs, and I launch it on nft.kalepale.com, and there's this little basic web interface. And then I don't know, it was maybe a week later, Lightmint actually implemented the exact same smart NFT, but on lightmint.com. So when you've got this decentralized APIs that you can call these contracts, you can just build any front end you want on top of it. Follow the same standards, and you get access to the same protocol. Which calling smart NFTs a protocol is a bit of a stretch. It's a game. Good questions. Do we have others? I see Lumenjack, you have figured out how to get on stage. Congratulations.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great. So thanks for doing this, guys. It's really, really informative, especially for someone who doesn't have the technical or coding background. You're doing a great job explaining. So I really, really love the potential for this with NFTs, but I feel like a lot of artists really don't have the technical know-how to take advantage of these tools. Is there any way that, what advice would you give for someone to take advantage of the amazing NFTs that you've already produced? For example, that dig is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. But the thought of actually executing something similar to that is, way over my head. What can we do to get artists up to date on how to take advantage of these amazing opportunities?
That is an excellent question, and the easy answer is essentially the ability to attach an NFT to a smart contract as a feature of something like Lightmint is kind of what I'm seeing. So there would be a platform where you can take your NFT and mint it to a smart contract versus just minting it to a DEX. So in the way, like if you're on Lightmint and you mint an NFT, it sends it to a brand new account and does the IPFS hash attachment. Essentially, you would run through all of that with the addition of also attaching it to a smart contract template. I think actually the most of the smart NFTs that I've done have been hard coded to the specific asset that I've launched, but it would be very easy for someone to rewrite those smart contracts such that you could run the experience, the dig, through any NFT. So the image changes, but the experience stays exactly the same for a brand new NFT. And so all that anybody listening would need to do is just copy the code that I've written, create a little service that allows you to mint NFTs so that artists don't have to fool around with any programming. They can just say, hey, here's a list of experiences, like smart contracted experiences, like the dig or royalty payments or whatever these smart contract experiences might be for NFTs. You have like this drop down list. And you say, I want to mint this one to this experience, and it configures the whole thing for you, right? So you as an artist wouldn't need to do anything. You just have to pick the experience that you want for that particular NFT. That's kind of the way that I see that happening. I'm just waiting for some entrepreneurial bright mind to pick up on that idea and, maybe mint themselves 0.5% or 1% of initial payments or something, and then take off and become famous and make a lot of money off of doing that sort of thing. That's what I'm hoping will happen, is sort of taking the ideas of things like smart NFTs and turning them into more like services that artists could capture.
Man, that would be great. And anyone who hasn't looked at the dig, you got to participate in that before it's too late. That's like the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Thanks. Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. Thanks for the question. Excellent question. Looks like we've got another folk here. I will invite you to the stage. You should be able to ask your question now if you're able to jump on. Oh, just got kicked off. That's fine. We're kind of over time. If you have a question, feel free. Sorry, we'll just go ahead and throw it into live chat, and we can answer that asynchronously. we've already gone far over our allocated time, and I'm sure Alex and Mark need to get back to work, as do I. So this has been a load of fun. I appreciate everyone jumping on for the questions and insights. Make sure to just kind of keep up with Yieldblox. They're doing fantastic things on Stellar turrets and on Stellar in general. They're a team you want to keep an eye on. So make sure to head over to their testnet implementation and play around with that, get a sense for what it is they're doing. And then also, if you're looking at building out some smart contracts on Stellar turrets, be sure and head over to our turrets Discord. There's also, I think somebody probably pasted a link to our turrets.stellar.org, which is a landing page which will redirect you to all the wonderful places you should go. Lots of very exciting things happening on Stellar right now. Lots to get involved with. It's a good time to be a Stellar developer. All right, thanks so much for jumping on. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mark, for hopping on and sharing your insights and exciting experiences with us. Very excited to see what you guys do, and we will catch you on the other side.